people were losing the plot. It was very interesting how immediately afterwards, sort of cyberspace just sort of cleared out. The trolls were just sort of, you couldn't see them for dust, people frantically deleting some of their madder tweets. 2024 self-evidently has been an extraordinary royal year, and so I felt that having originally published my biography of the King, which came out at the start of the year, so much had happened that it was important to really go back and look at all the events of this year. And there was an awful lot of interesting new material to put into this new edition. I've discovered that King has actually throughout been in remarkably good spirits. He's drawn quite heavily on his faith, but he's been absolutely adamant that the constitutional side of his role it should not change one bit. Yes, of course, he had to adjust the public duties, but in terms of the constitutional side of things, meeting prime ministers, meeting ambassadors, going through state papers, all that stuff, that hasn't changed one bit. It's obviously been a very different story for the Princess of Wales. The King has a constitutional role, therefore the public is fully entitled to know how is the head of state, and they're entitled to want to see him. And so the King has been very much sort of out and about, even when he's been on his way for medical treatment to hospital. He insisted, for example, on using the state Bentley, which is a very sort of visible vehicle, and going at slow speeds and waving to people. The Princess of Wales doesn't have a constitutional role, and she's a young mother of three, so obviously in her case it's been a much more private recovery. But she too has made these very powerful interventions during the year, notably her video in March announcing her cancer diagnosis, and I've discovered, the backstory to that, why it happened when it did, and also obviously her equally memorable video message telling us that her treatment had finished. In both cases, the direction of travel during the year has been very positive. It's been a case of getting better, but I mean there's no complacency there. And I think another element worth noting, and which I've described in the book, is the way that the whole institution, the family, have adapted to fill the gaps. We heard a lot about a slimmed-down monarchy when Charles III came to the throne. Well, it's undergone some substantial further slimming this year, and it's had to adapt. You can't suddenly recruit new members of the family. What I call the difficult dukes are still no longer part of the royal team. So it's been a very challenging year. I don't think at any point we've actually got into what you might call a full-blown crisis, but it's certainly been a long series of challenges, and I hope this book explains how they've handled them. If you look at the pace of royal events, the style of royal events in the latter part of 2024, you have to kind of occasionally remind yourself that this is a monarch who is still undergoing treatment for a very serious disease, because the King's approach has been business as usual. His doctors, and in particular Queen Camilla, have been trying to rein him in a bit and say, no, look, you can't overdo it. But when you see him getting off a plane in Australia, or flying to the middle of the Pacific for a Commonwealth summit, or opening Parliament, or hosting a state banquet, or on parade at the Cenotaph, you do have to keep reminding yourself that this is a king who is also still a patient, and behind the scenes everyone is mindful of that. You'll notice a few tweaks here and there, on visits, for example. Engagements might be a little bit shorter. His trip to the Pacific took him to Australia, didn't also take him to New Zealand. He'd been keen to go to New Zealand, but they said, look, you can't do everything. And also, it's one of the reasons why particularly his team are keen to avoid any overly stressful situations, and that's one of the reasons why at the moment there haven't been any sort of long, deep discussions with Prince Harry about his future, although at some point there will be, I'm sure, but not now. You may recall the conspiracy theories flying around back in February and March. Where is Kate? What's wrong with her? You even had quite serious publications re-reporting some of the wilder rumours, such as that in one case she'd had some cosmetic surgery, it had gone wrong, another one that she'd had a haircut that she didn't like and she was growing it through. These were some of the more hysterical, fanciful ideas flying around, and it could have been quite easy to knock them on the head, but the fact that she didn't, and she did it on her own terms, in her own time, was quite simply because she was uppermost in her mind was her children, and she wanted to wait till the beginning of the school holidays, and that's why that video came out on the very first day of her children's school holidays, because then she could scoop them up and they could go off as a family and spend the Easter holidays just explaining this, whereas had there been a sort of an announcement in the middle of the school week or whatever, you'd have had all the rumours flying around at the school gates and other children picking up bits of information. So it was very much a sensible, considered decision, and I think it required quite a lot of holding her nerve, because, you know, if you remember, by the time of that dramatic video, people were losing the plot. It was very interesting how immediately afterwards, sort of cyberspace just sort of cleared out. The trolls were just sort of, you couldn't see them for dust, people frantically deleting some of their madder tweets. And it did have a very powerful effect. And another point I do make in the book, actually, is, you know, that sight of the princess sitting on a bench, very simple, on a bench. It was done very professionally by BBC Studios Events, who cover state occasions. It wasn't a sort of DIY home video, but it was very simple. And there she was sitting there, surrounded by daffodils. And I think it was a very powerful sort of subliminal message there, because if you think back to the depths of the COVID pandemic in 2020, when the late Queen addressed the nation in the sort of darkest hour, and that concluded with a great shot of Windsor daffodils, I think there's something very reassuring about daffodils. Another element of the sort of transition from Elizabeth II to Charles III I discovered was the late Queen's diary. Now, her diary is still very much a state secret. All her diaries have sort of entered the Royal Archives now, where they will await her official biographer whenever that person is chosen. But in the course of my researches, yes, I discovered that she was keeping her diary right up to the very end, and that her last entry actually was concerning her the proposed Privy Council meeting, which followed her appointment of Liz Truss as Prime Minister. If you remember, there's that wonderful final image. Our last image of Elizabeth II is of her beaming in front of the fireplace at Balmoral. Very powerful image, and the reason she's got that smile on her face is she's sort of saying, you know, this is what I'm for. I'm a constitutional monarch. I have appointed a Prime Minister. We haven't had a functioning government for some time. Now there's a new Prime Minister. That is always followed by a Privy Council meeting. Her last diary entry was about the fact that that plans were being made for that Privy Council meeting. But I do think it's extraordinary that right to the end of her life, she was absolutely on top of things, and you know, uppermost in her mind was her sort of constitutional duties. I also discovered that the King is keeping a diary as well, but it won't be like the diary he used to keep, which some of which spilled out into the papers some years ago, some of which was memorably quoted in his official biography 30 years ago. They were sort of, you know, very, very readable, excellent, reflective diaries, but as monarch they're more straightforward. You know, this is what happened today. Because when you are a monarch, it's very important to have your own record of things, and the Queen learned that from her father when I was writing my biography of her, and she allowed me to read his diaries, and in it he said, look, I'm keeping these because I need to have my own record of what happened and when, because, you know, people can years later say, oh, I think you said this, and you need to be able to go back and go, no, this is what really happened because this is what I wrote down at the time. So he's keeping a diary. And her diary, well, you know, wouldn't we all love to read what she thought about all the extraordinary things she had to deal with during the longest reign in British history? What to do with the Duke of York? It's an ongoing question. It's been something the King's had to deal with since he became king, because of course it was back in 2019 that Prince Andrew did his disastrous interview with Newsnight, after which he essentially removed from public life, and so has been living this lonely world of sort of internal exile ever since. And increasingly the question is asked, Why is he still in Royal Lodge, which is a substantial royal residence, a very senior royal residence, because it was the Windsor residence of King George VI and the Queen Mother, and the Queen Mother never moved out. In her widowhood, that was her sort of main home outside London. And it went to Prince Andrew, and he's now there on his own, really. I mean, some of the time his ex-wife, the Duchess, lives there. The children obviously have moved out. They've got their own families elsewhere. And this is a substantial residence. Because it's outside the Windsor cordon, it requires its own security. That's extremely expensive, and the King is no longer prepared to stump up the bill for that, and has said to Prince Andrew, look, there's another property available inside the security cordon. There's Frogmore Cottage. It's not a little place by any means. It's quite a substantial house. It used to belong to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex before they left the country. There it is. It's ready. You can move in there. And all the security will be sorted out, because it's inside, if you like, this secure zone. And then Royal Lodge can be put on the sort of open rented market. I mean, you would need to be someone of very substantial means, but there is no shortage of important international figures who would rent a place like that and pick up the bill. It's got a lot of maintenance issues as well, and as the Mail revealed just the other day, I mean, the sort of peeling paint, things falling down, and so for the last few years, the King, or previously the late Queen, I discovered she was keen to move Prince Andrew out of there. And he's saying, well, no, I've got a lease on it, I'm going to stay, thanks very much. And what's happened, as I report in the book, is that the King has finally said, well, then in that case you're on your own, and has severed his living allowance. He was getting a living allowance to sort of cover staff costs and his bills and energy and all that stuff. He's now, that allowance has been removed. He's also now got the security bill, and there are maintenance issues, and if you can't keep the place in decent condition and secure, well, then the lease may be taken away, but for now it's over to him. All the bills are there, and he has to pay them, because he has been, as I said, cut off, because the King gave him an ultimatum. The Duke called the King's bluff and lost. The Duke of York says he's got independent means, he's got money to pay these bills, and he's going to stay there. I mean, if he can carry on paying the bills himself, well, then he'll stay there. I mean, that's the way it'll be. But I think the whole issue has just rather soured relations. I think it has been a sort of a distraction. I mean, it's not a huge concern for the King. He's got plenty of other things to worry about. But you know, here is a member of the royal family who is desperate to return to public life, and you can't return to public life if the public don't want you. And for now, at any rate, there is very little appetite to find a role for the Duke of York. I mean, some will say, you know, that he hasn't been found guilty of anything. The chap's innocent. This is all very unfair. But his way of handling it, I think, has not won him too many friends. The situation with Prince Harry is still pretty much where it was, despite certain indications during the year that there is a sort of thawing in his relations, particularly with his father. They haven't had a sit down, they haven't really met. Harry did come over, obviously, when the King was diagnosed with cancer. He got straight on a plane and came over to London to see his father and just to say, look, you know, we're with you. And it was, you know, everyone was very touched by that. And he did the decent thing, and he, you know, flew across an ocean to see his father. And the details of that meeting didn't come out. So you know, that I think everyone regarded as encouraging. Everyone thought it was very encouraging when Harry's paperback edition of his book, Spare, came out in the last few weeks. That didn't contain any new revelations either. So the sort of pointers are towards sort of gradual improvement in that relationship. However, people are saying, well, why did Harry come over in the summer and he didn't even see his father? And the issue, as I explain in the book, is what some at the palace call legal jeopardy. It's summed up in two words: Paul Burrell. Some viewers may recall in 2002 the former butler to Diana, Princess of Wales, was up in court in relation to various items that once belonged to Diana. And the whole court case fell apart after it turned out that the late Queen recalled a conversation with Paul Burrell in which he had said to her that he was looking after these items that belonged to Diana to keep them safe. And at that point, the prosecution just threw up their hands and said, no, we're giving up on this case, because the monarch is the fount of justice, is the head of the judiciary, and can't get involved in legal proceedings. And in this instance, Prince Harry is suing the British government in the courts at the moment over his security. And you can't have a situation where the son of the monarch is involved in legal action against the monarch's ministers if if he's suddenly going to say, oh, well, my dad said this or my father said that. And I think what people have learned from the publication of Harry's book is that he is prepared to chuck private family conversations out into the open, and they're not always accurate. And one story that particularly sprung to mind was his description in the book Spare, and it talks about the sort of lonely schoolboy who's told by some flunky that his beloved great-grandmother, the Queen Mother, has died, and it paints a picture of this poor little Etonian in his study learning this sad news. I mean, complete and utter nonsense. He was actually on a skiing holiday with his father and his brother at the time the news came through. So the view is, well, if he can get things like that wrong, it would be seriously problematic if he was to start recollecting things that his father might have said about a court case. So for now, while the legal proceedings are still going on, it's very hard for the king to really have any sort of long conversation with Harry. There are other issues as well. You know, clearly, Harry has a lot of things he wants to talk through and sort out. He's said that, and I think the view is at the moment that let's try and keep the king's stress levels down. Let's wait till he's properly recovered before that happens. And of course, any discussion with Harry about his, and with Meghan about future royal roles or returns or relations with the family, anything like that, has really got to be a three-way conversation. It's got to be both with the King and with the Prince of Wales. And so the King can't really start having, if you like, bilateral discussions with Harry without getting William on board as well. And at the moment, it seems that there is no appetite for that coming from the Prince of Wales. So I think the situation is very much on hold. It hasn't got any worse. I think the signs are that the passage of time is making everyone a little more forgiving and relaxed, but it's still some way off.